So thanks for coming on the podcast. Really appreciate it. It's a bit funny because we've just been chatting outside of the pod for the last half hour. And we could have just recorded that, and it probably wouldn't be in the podcast. So we're going to try and reenact what we've just talked about for the last half hour, if that's all right. Of course,
yeah.
But for the purpose of our viewers, could you please start by introducing yourself?
Yeah, I am Clare Gowar, and I was formerly the Global Lead for Health and Wellbeing at Philips. And I left about 2 months ago and have just started, I'm right at the beginning of my journey in setting up my own consultancy, company called Enterprise Wellbeing Consultancy. So leveraging, I was at Philips for 11 years, so I'm leveraging all my experience in health and wellbeing roles there, and actually sort of then starting up on my own and working with smaller and medium sort of businesses and helping them develop their strategy and give them the tools and framework to take it forward.
Got you.
So that's quite a long introduction.
No, that was short compared to some of the ones that we get on here. No, so tell me about your career path then. So what's your
so
where did you go to school?
Interesting.
No, you don't need to start.
Jersey, which might be unusual.
Oh,
that
is interesting.
I'm a Channel Islander. So like I said, I was at Philips for 11 years, and I started in 2013 as a health and wellbeing account manager for Philips in the UK.
So what does that mean? Internally?
It was internal,
right.
And they just made a decision to outsource all their health and wellbeing provisions, so occupational health, absence management, physio, and they needed someone to come in and essentially account manage those companies and just ensure that they were meeting SLAs, that they kept on budget, etc. So that's how I started, and even I think back 11 years ago, there weren't many roles that had health and wellbeing in the title. They didn't really exist. So I was very fortunate to be pretty much at the forefront then in terms of being in that space and that industry. It was a fantastic and very steep learning curve for me because my background previously, I'm not a HR generalist. I don't have a medical background. I actually was in telecommunications for 11 years,
Right.
So I worked at some of the companies you'll know, Samsung and Apple. And I basically did majority of marketing and sales for select mobile phone devices. Wow. So sort of all the flagship ones with Samsung back in the day when you had the flip phones. And then Apple, it was a new business called the iPhone team. Okay. You might have heard of that product. So I joined that team as kind of a program manager to help through the sell-through of the devices with all the UK operators and retailers, but very different.
Yeah. So how did you take such a turn in your career?
Such a turn. It came from a little bit of a lived experience that when I left one of those organisations, I found I was very much at sort of the tipping point of struggling with my health. Right. I think in hindsight, I wouldn't say it was burnout, but in hindsight, it was definitely something close to that or akin to that. And that was just purely through wanting to do my best, working the hours that I wanted to work, but also looking after a very small baby at the time. So I needed to take that, and I deliberately made the decision to leave to focus on myself a little bit and give my own health that priority, which we often fail to do. Yeah. I was fortunate at the time I could do that. But then being at home, I realised that possibly wasn't what was fueling me and energising me any more than being in the workplace. So I was really looking for something quite a different point in my career, to look for something quite different. And what was so exciting about joining Philips was when I read the role description, there was that account management piece. And I thought, I can bring that to the role. They're not looking for an occupational health provider or because they've outsourced that service. Yes. They're looking for someone to come in and really support those companies, but also account manage from that perspective as well. So that's how I got into it. Yeah. And it was a small role at the beginning, a couple of hours a week, and I gradually grew it. I took on more accountability, more responsibility. And Philips is a fascinating environment because it's also in 11 years. If you look, it used to sell TVs and light bulbs, and it's completely diversified its portfolio and really moved into more of a med tech, health tech space. Okay. So along that line, it became even fundamental to the culture and the DNA of the organisation that when we were talking externally about health and wellbeing and improving our customer and consumer health and wellbeing, we have to make that quite authentic for your own people as well. It's one of the reasons that people join Philips as well. So it's been a fantastic journey. So I said, started in the UK role, then 6 years ago moved to the global lead role as well.
Yeah. So how was that? How was managing it globally?
It's a great question, because it's not just doing what you did locally for the UK business suddenly transplanted into global. There's a lot of learnings and experience I did bring into that role, but you're dealing suddenly with a very diverse and distributed population. You have diverse in terms of demographic, culture, age, distributed in terms of the number of countries, I think 17 or 18 countries, and different working environments. So we have employees in manufacturing, we have employees in office-based roles, we had employees, sort of field service engineers on the road. So really different in terms of picture. And I think there was, what also became apparent more so at a global level, you really need to know who your stakeholders are. And there's a lot more of that negotiation, building those trusted relations, but also a lot more that you have to do around establishing the really clear proof points of why we need to focus on this. And like I said, it was already in the culture and the company DNA, but that won't keep it going forever. You have to sustain that, and it's sustained through a little bit of the data, but also really strong proof points in terms of the activities that you're doing, the value on that investment, and the return on the investment as well.
Okay, yeah, no, that's so interesting. Yeah, no, and you're not the first person to talk about. Well, there seems to be a theme around like that stakeholder relationship management, right? So you said when you were the account manager, or your first role, it was more about managing that relationship with the suppliers. Then it became managing relationships with your senior stakeholders and people around the globe. So it's, as you say, even if you don't necessarily have that, the medical background or the subject matter expertise around wellbeing, which I'm sure you do have now. I'm sure you picked up along the way, but definitely. It's that relationship management as much as anything, right? Yeah,
I think that's key. In terms of, especially if you're, and we're obviously, Philips a little bit further along in its journey in terms of developing its wellbeing strategy and framework, and the programs and tools that people need in that. But I think you can only get there if you have that strong stakeholder management and relationship piece. I think it comes a little bit from leaders. I think with the best intent, leaders believe in this. They really understand the importance of looking after their people, because ultimately their business is their people. Right. I think leaders sometimes they struggle in terms of how to prioritise it when there are so many other things and competing demands on their table, and also struggling to understand their role in it. And there's a little bit of many health and wellbeing leaders will be experiencing this or have felt this in their careers, where there's a little bit of an onus on an individual to sort everything out versus this understanding that it's a collective responsibility and ownership. If there's someone struggling, we've got a population here that have got high absenteeism, struggling with mental health, psychosocial illness. I'll give it to the health and wellbeing manager will sort it out. And I think that there is so many fundamental factors that are building into what might be causing that and creating that, that you really need to unpick it, but it requires a lot of people to create that change and improve it, not just, you can't rely on one individual.
That's good advice. That's good advice, much as you'd like to. It makes it easier, right?
But I think where leaders can have a role, and this is where we saw some really good impact, was when they got behind an initiative or lent their voice. And it had to be, and I've heard this kind of shared already, it had to be quite an authentic voice in terms of their experiences. And if they could bring a personal experience, fantastic. Not many leaders do. I can understand why. But if they could, even better. But when a leader could talk authentically, openly, perhaps even be a bit vulnerable, and that's not a comfortable word for leaders, demonstrate that compassion, I think then you've really got people bought in, and they really truly believe in what you're saying and the importance of what you're saying as well.
Absolutely. I'm smiling as you say that, because I shouldn't really. Should I share this? I won't share. I definitely won't share the name of the client. But I once, fairly recently, worked with an organisation, large multinational organisation. And we had the same discussion. You know, it would lend real weight to this whole program that we were doing around mental health and wellbeing if we had the endorsement from senior leaders. Chief exec immediately put his hand up. Oh, I'll do it. So we were like, oh, brilliant. You know, that's great news. He then sent through what looked like a pre-recorded hostage video. Like, it was like, I really care about wellbeing because it is really good. And I was just like, we can't send that out. Like, it completely missed the point in terms of authenticity. There was no personal story to it. And like you said, look, I'm not expecting him to suddenly start opening up and giving this really vulnerable story, but completely missed the point in terms of it needs to be authentic. It needs to be authentic, because I had the worry, and it didn't. I can't remember. Did that end up going out? I'm not entirely sure. I think my advice was no, because I thought it could do more damage, more harm than good. You know, because there's a real risk with this stuff that people see it as a tick box exercise, and if you hear someone, chief exec, talking about it in a way that perpetuates that, it could cause more harm than good. So,
It takes courage to say no, though. If it's a CEO that's done it, I know. Well, but you have to make the right call, and you know yourself. Do I believe it? And if I don't, then...
Well, I'm not working with them anymore. So take from that what you will. Yeah,
you did the right thing.
Maybe.
But I think that's a great example as well of the intent is there. The intent is good, and it just needs shaping and a little bit. I think in a conversation with that CEO in terms of what would actually come across better versus not what doesn't come across so well.
Absolutely.
Oh God.
So I don't have to share the name of that because I'm definitely not. Another way we talked outside the booth about expanding impact of these potentially global programs. You mentioned champion networks, right?
Yes.
And you said that was.
Yeah. This was our grassroots, bottom-up champion networks have been, I'd say, one of the most impactful things that we were able to do at Philips. And it was leveraging people power, but it's incredible, and it can be genuinely transformational. And this started post-COVID. Again, I'd started a mental health champion program in the UK. So had sort of the framework for how that could potentially be deployed at a global level. And we start small, we always start small, and we went where the energy was, because a lot of people then, when we sort of introduced this idea, and I partnered with occupational health on this, so I thought that was a really good sort of meeting of minds in terms of that proactive, preventative approach. And we had a lot of sort of people say, no, it won't work unless your leaders are bought in. And leaders just weren't ready, and leaders just weren't there. But post-COVID, there was far more appetite for people wanted to feel useful and valued and valuable.
Yeah.
And they really wanted to give their time to help others. And I'd say that's fantastic people at Philips that would commit to do that. And we structured the programme. There was a sign-up form process they had to go through in terms of being sort of accepted into the programme. And it was an accredited programme as well, so there was a certification at the end of it. And so we trained people to essentially be a champion for others, for peers, to provide a listening ear, a shoulder for them to lean on, but also then signpost them to where they could get that professional help. Yeah. So we have sort of various EAP providers in the company as well. Yeah. So that would be, for example, one sort of avenue for them to signpost to. Yeah. And that piece was really critical. So we had to talk about safeguarding and boundaries within the context of that training as well. Because these aren't mental health experts, they are just peers. But they are peers that are trained to really listen, and I think that's the difference. Plus, people can resonate to someone who works in their own company and understands the politics and the dynamics of being in that environment. Sure. But so started small, went where the energy was, grew to until we had champions in every single market, and we really didn't, and very deliberately didn't chase numbers on this. It wasn't about how many, it was about the quality and the fact that there was that provision there as well. Right. And that may change as it evolves, but certainly that wasn't the starting point.
Yeah.
But I think just having, Phillips did talk about mental health champions even in their annual report, because the impact it had from equipping people to have those conversations, but some of them really wanting to, raise this in their company meetings, in their town halls, in their team meetings, to be able to put their hand up and say, I'm a mental health champion. If you're struggling with anything, please, you can reach out to me in confidence. Yeah. And alongside that, we've got 12, we did have 12 employee resource groups. Right. Made up of different sort of populations and communities in the workplace as well. And I've heard again sort of people mention about the power of the employee resource groups. But there was a governance, there was a framework. Employee resource groups were even there to help sort of dictate and could feed into policy changes, right? They can be incredibly powerful and incredibly sort of source of good. And immediately, whatever your kind of people power community is or network, what it does is provide a two-way dialogue. Yeah. So it's not just you talking to them, training them, they provide feedback to you. Yeah. And that's so powerful, because you think, particularly if you're looking always to, are we meeting people where they are? Yeah. Are we understanding what's really impacting the health and well-being of our people? There are many different data points you can look at, but actually sometimes just talking to the people who are there can provide some fantastic insights and more sort of qualitative insights as well. Yeah, so I really champion people, people power communities and networks. I keep saying
that. Is that what it was called? No.
No, I wish we had, but no. But I really advocate for it. Yeah, really advocate.
Yeah. I mean, look, it's one of the best ways, right? It's one of the only ways I can really think of to scale this sort of approach when you're looking at a global organisation. I mean, I'll be honest with you, in the moments where I have small existential crises tend to be when I'm working with a very large organisation, and it's like, how do we do this? Like, how do we do this? I can see how we can scale wellbeing across this, these few hundred people in this office here, but how do we impact this globally across the piece? And this is one of the ways that you leverage that, right?
Yeah, the scalability of it is such a good point. And also having a bit of opportunity to try and test. So, because I'd started the Mental Health Champion Network in the UK, I already had some really good proof points in terms of what was working well, what didn't, what do we need to tweak. Therefore, let's leverage that before we leverage it and take it to the global organisation. But I think it's important to work with a provider on this, because it's not probably training you'd want to do in-house. You do want that sort of accredited experience as well. And from a governance perspective, you can really sort of, brings a huge benefit. And you need a structure in place, and you need to really clarify the role of a champion as well. So what it is, but equally what it isn't. But I think when there's a lot of, if for global organisations, you will have so many people that are willing and want to be part of this. It was never a struggle to get people to sign up. It was almost the opposite at times.
I really like that piece you're saying around the boundaries and defining the role effectively. That's one of the things that, unfortunately, and I really don't want to sound like I'm anti mental health first aid, because I'm not, and I really like what Mental Health First Aid England do and have done in terms of raising awareness. But I've attended that training myself, and there was nothing really around what's the role. There was a little bit, I'm sure there was some, but it didn't feel like enough support around it. And there were points where I thought, there's a risk here that, someone could take on this role and get themselves into a situation that affects them or the other person, and they don't have a support network to be able to draw back on.
So that's interesting. I haven't done the mental health first aid training, but I did have colleagues who went through it after training as a champion. And they've perhaps shared some similar views, but also recognised that the differences, that the champion programme was already in place as a kind of a preventative solution, whereas first aid, they were like, it's that's when someone's on the floor. It's kind of a little bit maybe too late. But I don't know, so I can't.
No, but that is fair. That is fair, because actually that's what mental health first aid, and that's why I don't want to be too judgmental about it, because I do think mental health first aid England are quite clear that this is intervention for when someone's in crisis or really needs help. Yeah. But I think just naturally, especially if you work in that area like I do, you take some of that and you think, well, yeah, but how can I use this preventatively? You know, which might be okay for someone like me who's worked in this space for 15 years. But if it's someone taking it on completely fresh, I think that's quite dangerous.
It complements a champion, I think.
I agree.
Guess a program.
I agree.
That's where it can have like a real benefit, doesn't it? Yeah.
And there were bits in it that really illuminated, you know, like learning about psychoses and all this sort of stuff, that it went quite in depth. And whilst there was part of me that thought, do I need to know all this? There was also a part that thought, this is quite interesting. And why not? You know, why not? You would learn about different physical ailments without feeling like you shouldn't. So why not with mental? So,
and I think also you get what we found with the Champion programme as it's grown. And again, a benefit to the fact that we could do the training was we did get, after a certain, there almost became a tipping point where suddenly it did get on the radar of leaders and it did get on the radar of HR. And that's when people really started to engage and put their hand up and wanted to be part of that movement. And the leaders didn't have exactly the same flavour of well, it was a similar flavour, slightly different approach, because their role wasn't just as mental health champion, it was a leader. But you can see from the scalability, it can build such positive momentum, and I think that's what we really loved about it.
I was just about to say that word. No, I love what you've talked about in terms of the momentum that you build. So, you know, one of the things that, because I'm an absolute geek, that I read about, so when COVID first kicked off, did it kick off? Is that how you describe COVID? I don't know, it was such a strange period, right? But I went and researched previous epidemics, so I had a look at the SARS crisis and in Hong Kong and China in the mid 2000s, was it? Or is it earlier on?
It's proper geeking on.
So I had a look at that. And I started researching about it. And one of the things that I noticed was that actually, whilst, yes, it had a negative impact on many measures of mental health and well-being because people were worried and uncertain and all the rest of it, lots of pro-social behaviours went up. So people were helping people more often. They were like trying to reach out and be less isolated and support one another. And they were also reporting that they were more motivated to look after not just their mental but also their physical health. So it almost got like health onto the radar of normal people. And I feel like we saw, but then what it showed was that unfortunately there was that peak during the SARS outbreak, but then it just went back to normal levels. COVID, I feel like the data did show we had that peak, and unfortunately, we're on that downward trajectory. But what you seem to have done there is like ride the wave of that pro-social, you know, that uptick in people wanting to help one another.
Yeah, I think we did.
Kept that momentum up.
I think, though, that generally most humans do want to help others. I think that's kind of an innate thing that most of us are born with, like to give their time to help others. And even if it can be light touch or you know, they could take the role as far as they wanted to, in terms of they could be kind of passive and people could approach them, or they could be more proactive, and which we really encouraged actually was just having, you know, checking in with people, just asking a better question than how are you, you know, just kind of how's your week been, or how have you slept? Sleep's always a fascinating one, but so just trying to, it could be flex to how comfortable that individual felt in terms of how much they wanted to take it forward. But ultimately most people do, because it just became part of, you know, some of the skills we were teaching was just also helping them to understand how to be good people as well. I think that was what was so lovely about it. Yeah, right. I better ask a final question, because we need to get you back, because you're running a session, aren't you? So I'll keep it very quick. So, although it is quite broad. I'll try not to.
Generational differences. What people have talked about is tension between these generations. So a lot of it is essentially, well, I went through this horrible workplace, so you should go through it as well, and what you're moaning about. But I don't know. I feel like that will calm down. Just naturally.
I think that could be a little bit. There was potential for older workers to not quite understand or engage with some of the mental health, but I we didn't really see that,
No.
because actually I think they, again, that lived experience going through COVID, when people were suddenly forced, we had most of our, aside from our fantastic people who stayed in our manufacturing facilities, most people sort of suddenly went into the home place. And irrespective of age, you were confronted with the realities of everyone living together, the stress that created. I think that did generate more of a natural empathy for people to kind of just be sensitive to what other people might be going through, kind of any age. I think so as well. Yeah.
And it sounds like you had quite a strong sense of identity within Philips, right? That maybe you didn't have these sub-identities as like, along the generational routes. Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe, but I think we probably did, because it had been, Philips has been around for 132 years now. And some people joined and, worked there their whole lives, and they had family members that worked there as well. But which was nice, because it gave it quite a nice community feel at times. But I think it was there, but possibly not fully kind of explored.
One to look out for.
Yeah.
One to look out for. Right, cool. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. We'll have to get you on a full-length podcast at some point.
Is that not full length?
That was only 28 minutes, so it was fairly long. But we do an online one as well. So
I'd love to come back. So
like
now
this.
I've sort of started my own business as well. I'm very much at the sort of first stages of that, and would love to leverage the community and the Working Well community to kind of mentor me and support any kind of insights and guidance they can build through that as well. As I take it forward, would be fantastic.
Appreciate it, definitely. That's what
you.
it's there for. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Awesome.
All done.